Depression can be a silent killer among all of us. We often don't realize the depth or seriousness, as many shy away, withdraw, or are silenced because of the stigma associated with mental health issues. Every 11 minutes, someone in the U.S. dies by suicide. We as adults struggle, sometimes become isolated, and are not always able to access the help we need. Imagine, though, dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts at a much more vulnerable age. The most challenging years for parents are the teen years, and those teenage years seem to begin younger and younger with the amount of digital influence that can impact each of our teens. What makes it so challenging are certainly the biological changes our children begin to experience, but more so is the reality that we can no longer parent in the way we did when our children were younger. Becoming secretive as a teen can be developmentally appropriate as they become more separate and independent decision makers. And sometimes the secrecy is hiding something from parents and even from their friends. Suicide deaths have increased 56% for youth aged 10 to 24 over the last decade. Welcome to Small and Gutsy, a podcast featuring interviews with nonprofit and social impact organizations under $10 million. My name is Laura Witkoff, and I'm excited and proud to be your host. My hope is that you love the stories as much as we do, and perhaps you will find needed services, a job, volunteer, or donate. Feel free to pass along any valuable information you hear on this podcast to others, and remember to send me the name of any organization you'd like featured at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com. LifeAct was founded in 1992 in Cleveland, Ohio by Tim Treadway, who lost his son to suicide. For the first 12 years of its existence, it was a chapter of the research-focused American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Over the years, LifeAct became an independent nonprofit organization training professionals including teachers, school counselors, social workers, physicians, nurses, clergy, and law enforcement officers to see the warning signs of suicide and take steps to keep youth safe. In 2014, more current research suggested data showing increasingly younger children contemplating suicide, and as a result, LifeAct created and launched a middle school program. LifeAct's mission is to prevent suicide by teaching young people to recognize the warning signs of suicide in themselves and their peers, and to seek professional help. To date, more than 235,000 Northeast Ohio middle and high school teens have been educated to recognize the warning signs of suicide. LifeAct has a proactive, positive approach to promoting life by preventing suicide. I am so excited to introduce my guests, Executive Director and CEO Jack Binder, Associate Board Member Lizzie Janiello. So let's get started. Welcome, Jack and Lizzie. Please share your passion about LifeAct and your deep connection and commitment and what led to your involvement.
A brief introduction again. My name is Jack Binder. I'm the CEO of LifeAct, and my disclaimer normally comes with, I'm not from the nonprofit world. I'm not a social worker. I can give you a whole list of all the things that I'm not. What I am is I'm a businessman. I'm a parent. I'm a husband. I'm a coach. I've coached probably 1,000 kids. My wife and I have raised 3 boys. Unfortunately, we've had several friends who've lost their children to suicide. We've seen how devastating that is, and in some cases, these children were essentially our own. We were that close to them, and it hurts just as much. I got involved with the organization because I truly believe, and I've seen it in other families, that this is something that in many cases can be prevented if caught early enough. Not in all cases. Sometimes, as we say, it's like a cancer, and sometimes the cancer wins. But we're doing a much better job of identifying it early and taking professional intervention. I became involved with this organization about 7 years ago at the board level, where I ran their strategic plan for them. I approached the board chairman, who I knew as a personal friend, and I said, this is a cause that is really important to me. I feel like I have to do something. I literally said, I will be the envelope stuffer. I'm at a point in my career where I can do that stuff, and no matter how menial it is, I feel I need to be doing something. At that point in time, we were named Suicide Prevention Education Alliance. And as our executive director at the time pointed out to me, think about that when it comes in on your caller ID. The first word says suicide. Is that how you want to start a discussion with somebody? Or how many people are ever going to pick up that phone? And a large part of our mission isn't just preventing suicide, it's promoting mental health, which is a very positive thing. So we went through a rebranding, and the rebranding was totally changing our focus. We went from starting with the word suicide to starting with the word life.
Yes.
And it's a very proactive word, LifeAct. It's do something to preserve life. People think I'm a bit weird when I tell them what we do, and I tell them we have fun. We have a great time. I love the people I work with. I love our board, the people who donate to our organization. This is a very energized, positive organization. I would struggle to stay involved with an organization like this if it were all darkness and gloom and bad news every single day. So we really needed to flip the script and get aggressive. We take a very proactive approach. We take a, if you will, a business-like approach. I come from the private sector. I come from large business, small business. When we go in and see our funders, I've been known to tell them we're not a nonprofit. And they will say, well, we only fund nonprofits. And I will say, well, we are a 501c3, but up here in our heads, we think like we're a for-profit because we have to earn our money every day. And we are in the business to make more money so that we can provide more programming. We don't buy back shares. We don't distribute dividends. We don't retain earnings. We reinvest in program, and that's how we grow. And that's how we reach 30,000 students a year. And in our peak year, pre-COVID, we had 3,200 students come forward seeking help.
Wow.
So it's great metrics. We're very efficacious and we're very efficient. And I'm really proud of that. It's you just don't get a bang for your buck like that in too many other areas. We're developing an educational platform that's very robust and it can be executed across state lines. There's a lot of opportunities with it. So it's very gratifying.
I love the frame of you're really reinvesting in preserving life and in recognizing mental illness is a piece, but the educational component reduces the stigma and allows for people to get the help that they need.
I come from the chemical business. I can tell you that the chemical business is more lucrative, but nothing is more gratifying.
It fills your soul.
It does.
Lizzie, share your passion, your involvement, and a little bit about the associate board. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, so I joined the associate board pretty recently, actually about 6 months ago. And for me, the story is very personal. I struggled very much growing up. I think it started with anxiety in elementary school and kind of built from there. I was definitely showing signs of depression and eating disorder in middle school and high school, and it either went unnoticed or too many people saw and didn't say anything. Sometimes I think it's like the bystander effect, where if too many people see what's going on and are involved, then no one comes up and says anything. And I think that definitely happened with me. So I made it through high school okay. I was class president. I was in charge of everything. People came to me for help, and no one really knew that I was really struggling myself. And it wasn't until I got to college that things really kind of spiraled from there. And I never talked to anyone about it. It was a very secretive part of my life until I met my best friend sophomore year, who has since turned boyfriend of 9 years. He recognized the signs of depression and suicide, and he saw them in me and, got me help. We went to my psychology professor, who was very helpful, and then she brought me to a psychologist, and that person was the first person who had asked me the very tough question of, have you ever thought of hurting yourself? And that was a very scary question for a college student, I think for anyone. And I think one of the biggest myths is people think that if you ask that question, you're going to plant the seed in someone's head. And for me, it was a huge relief for someone to ask me that. I had been hiding it for so long, and it's this huge weight on your shoulders. And for someone to finally know that that's what you're thinking, it was a huge relief. So from there, many, many years of treatment and therapy and hospitalizations and the whole 9 yards. It was really tough. I didn't think that I was going to ever recover for a very long time, especially with my eating disorder. People kind of said I would be a chronic case and I would just live with this for the rest of my life and kind of get used to it. But I'm very thankful that I have made it much farther than people thought possible. I owe a lot of that to my boyfriend and the organizations that I've got involved in. So I joined LifeAct because I think if there was a program like this when I was younger, maybe I would have said something earlier or a friend would have said something earlier. And I had so many years, probably 10 years of rewiring my brain from something that was so ingrained in me. I didn't know how to think differently. And so I really wish that something had happened when I was younger And I think it would have prevented a lot of rock bottoms that I've hit in my 20s that I wish could have been prevented. So I think early detection is really important. I think that's great that we're reaching middle schoolers now, high schoolers. And I think even beyond that, we still need to get this message out to people who are older in their 20s. Like, this is so important. It doesn't go away. And the longer that you wait and you don't get help, the harder it is to recover.
First of all, thank you for sharing your very personal story. And you said so many beautiful kernels of wisdom. I'm going to try to go back and pull some of them out. The fact that you had to build that wall and kept that wall of secrecy, I think, is probably a universal feeling for a lot of young kids, and then into older adolescents, and then certainly college. And what a gift to have someone, and you mentioned your boyfriend, who really saw you, loved you and saw you for you, and said, let's really try to figure out what might help you. I'm assuming that the programmatic area that LifeAct celebrates and really teaches and educates is to start recognizing in a positive way to help people come forward in something that we know from stigma is, I don't want to deal with it, or I don't want to see it, or we internalize no one wants to deal with this. And the other piece is how alone we can feel, thinking no one else feels the same way we do. So I'm grateful that you had someone who sort of pointed it out at a place in your life where you could recognize it and go get help. And that you're in this amazing organization that you believe in, because you know that if this had been something you could have accessed earlier, or a friend, you might not have had to experience some of the things that you did during your 20s. So I know that was a lot that I sort of tried to repackage and put forth, but I'm very appreciative that you shared, because it really makes the case of why LifeAct is so vital to so many people. And I'd love to hear, I know you started more in the high school and now moving into the middle school, which I think is fantastic. I don't know, Jack or Lizzie, if you want to speak to a little bit of the programmatic piece that you offer both to middle school, high school, and it sounds like caregivers, community advocates, anyone in the space who might recognize when someone is having a hard time.
So this program was developed in conjunction with University Hospitals here in Cleveland about 16, 17 years ago. And we started with one instructor, one dedicated instructor delivering programming into 8 or 9 schools. We're now up to over 200 schools. And really what we consider a victory is we go in and we paint a picture of the outward signs and some of the feelings and emotions that a student might feel or might see in their friends. And it allows them to kind of look at it objectively and differentiate between what's a bad day and what's a bad trend and what's a really bad scenario that's down the road. And it's a victory when a student approaches one of our instructors at the end of a class and says, for 45 minutes or 90 minutes, you've been talking about all these things and describing all these things. You've been describing me. And they haven't really been able to put a voice to it before. They just knew that something wasn't right, and they don't know what it is. But when you describe all the outward manifestations of it, that's when they start to see that it is themselves, or it is their girlfriend or their boyfriend or something like that. And one thing I wanted to capitalize on is that I have this joke that I think every generation is of the opinion that the world will end after the next generation. And I think that nothing really could be farther from the truth right now. I think that this younger generation right now, they're incredibly courageous. They're being forced to deal with things at a younger age that we never even would have conceived of 2 generations ago. There's really no PG rating in life anymore. If you've got a mobile device, you're exposed to everything and you're being challenged to deal with it. So these kids really have to, they've got to face up to it. And we as adults need to realize that pretending it doesn't exist isn't an option, because it does exist every day in their life. They talk about it at school. They talk about it on weekends. It's on their mobile platforms, the cyberbullying, the posturing on social media, things like that, trying to make your life seem so great and therefore making everybody else's life seem not so great. These are the realities that these kids have to deal with, and we can leverage that. They're very willing to talk if we create the platform for it. So what we do is we present scenarios of if you see these types of behaviors. If Lizzie was saying she was class president and very involved in a lot of things, well, maybe you have a friend that's very involved in a lot of things, and then all of a sudden one year they don't get involved. Maybe they're captain of the lacrosse team or the lead in the play, or the head of the marching band section, and then they lose interest in it, and their grades start to fall. They become isolated. And any one of those things might not make you stand up and take note, but you start to see these patterns, and we help the kids identify these patterns and what to look for. And we're very clear with them. We don't expect the kids to diagnose anything. See behaviors in your friends, and if you see behaviors that are looking like this, think about it, and then understand the power that you have as a 14-year-old or a 13-year-old, as a 12-year-old. You got tremendous power to go to a trusted adult and say, I'm concerned for a friend of mine, or I'm concerned for myself. We might take a picture of an entire classroom of students and say, can you spot the student who has depression? And people will struggle. They say it could be the one in the back with his head down, or the girl over there who's not paying attention. And we're like, no, it's a trick question. You can't spot them. It doesn't show on their face. It's not like a rash. You don't cough from it. So how else do you know? Well, you have to observe these behaviors, and it's a little bit more nuanced. But I think these kids are so dialed in and so intuitive right now, and they're very smart and they're very courageous. So we just leverage that. We take advantage of it.
You know, when you leverage it, you're also empowering them to not stand by and also not to sit in their own worry. Because when you have a friend who you think you're worried about, you internalize that worry too. You may be worrying about them and you're not sure where to go. And I love the idea of the different signs, because you're not asking kids to diagnose themselves or others. You're raising awareness on what may or may not be. And so getting professional help is the next step to learning more about it. And I love the story you shared about the child that comes up to the instructor and says, you know, you're describing me, because one of the feelings that can happen to a kid and even a young adult is they chronically are trying to talk themselves out of feeling this way because they know something isn't right, but they also don't think anyone around them is feeling the same way. I commend you for taking this on and actually celebrating the opportunity to do something about it in a forward-thinking, positive way, rather than, as you pointed out, the doom and gloom, which of course we face when something happens. You're not negating that. You're just finding another path in where I think students can really grab onto.
It is, and we really focus on visuals and helping them really understand these outward manifestations, because you could easily have 20 kids in a classroom and ask them, is there anybody here suffering from depression? And you might have 20 out of 20 saying no. And then you might say, okay, have you noticed these behavioral changes in yourself or a friend? Well, yeah, we've seen that all the time. They don't necessarily know what they have. And sometimes it isn't depression. Sometimes it is something else. But a student will come to us and say, based upon what I've heard today, there's something not right with me. And I don't know what it is. I'm not a doctor. I'm not supposed to diagnose this. But it's not getting better. It's getting worse. And I can't explain why. There isn't a reason for it. There isn't that my girlfriend or boyfriend broke up with me and I flunked a test. Okay, that can be a bad day or a bad few days or maybe even longer, but this might be going on for 6 months, 12 months, and it's a downward spiral, and they don't know how to stop it. They don't know what's causing it. They don't know what to do about it. That's the point we're trying to get them to, is not to figure out what's wrong, just to figure out that maybe it could be better.
I love that you differentiate between, because we all have bad days and we all have huge disappointments and we all have times where we're going to cry about things, but that may not fall into the same category, or it may. And so to start to raise that awareness, both in ourselves and others, is key to your program, really. Lizzie, chime in here. I know that you've only been part of this for 6 months, but what are some of the things that you've observed or seen in either on online resources or through the engagement with the board?
Definitely, I think one of the things that Jack had just mentioned, which I think is really important in opening the dialogue now with parents and adolescents, is I think for a lot of people, everyone blames these changes and behaviors on being a teen, right? Like if you're sleeping too much, if you're not talking to your parents, if you're isolating, if you're crying, like that's because you're a teen, that's because you're moody. Like that's always been, what all these changes have been attributed to. And I'm sure part of mine also. So I think talking to people about the seriousness of these changes and what it can mean. And again, not always is depression, right? It could be a lot of other things. It could really just be a bad day. But I think that's something that I think is really important that I'm glad LifeAct is doing and really teaching, that it's not just you're having a bad day and it's not just that you're a teenager. Like, these are real clinical disorders that need to be addressed. As far as being a part of LifeAct, I've absolutely loved it. It has been such an amazing experience for me. The associate board, I think, is really interesting. I think there are very few organizations that really seek out people at my level, like a young professional. I'm passionate about this cause, but it's a lot more than that. I think a lot of people assume an associate board might be like to raise money, to fundraise. That's what I kind of thought at first too. Like, that's all I can kind of help you do is raise money. And as Jack always says, like, that's the third priority. You know, we have two other priorities before that. And the first is kind of getting the awareness out from our group of friends, our peers, our generation, really trying to get people involved. And the second is personal and professional development, which has been absolutely amazing again for me. I've talked with, and Jack has connected me with, half a dozen people who have helped me in my career goals as I'm kind of going through some changes now. And I definitely would not have known about any of these people if it wasn't for the associate board and getting involved. And we also get to sit on committees that the board of directors are part of. So I feel like I'm actually having an impact. For example, on the programming committee, like, the suggestions I gave were actually implemented into a lesson, which is unbelievable. I don't think that many people have that opportunity. So it's not just that I meet with people my age who are also passionate. It's I'm having a real impact in the organization, which is very rewarding and obviously something I don't think a lot of young professionals have the option to do.
I'm so glad you shared that, because to me, it sounds like it really is the culture of your entire organization. Because as you both referred to, the importance of getting the word out and the importance for young people to start to recognize in themselves and others is about self-determination. And when you think about the associate board and the connection to your own path and your own career development and your own engagement with the topic and other senior members allows for that full self-determination. So not only do you offer this programmatically as an entity, as LifeAct, but you also have created this culture internally. And I commend the leadership for taking this on. It also, I think, my guess is, Lizzie, it adds so much value because you're closer to the generation you're serving. And so if you come up with some ideas around facilitation or an activity, because you experience that, it's going to give it much more credibility. And my guess is be much more real for the students and even the educators who are receiving the training.
Yes, I can't wait until COVID is over so we can actually meet the rest of the organization. I haven't met any of the youth advisory board or the students or the instructors in person, so I'm really excited for when we can finally see people in person and really bring things back together here.
You know, I had one of those moments a couple of years ago before we established the associate board. I was having dinner with my wife and another couple and their daughter, who I think at the time she was probably in her early 20s. And I was kind of questioning her about, how do we understand our messaging and are we reaching the target audience with the right message? And I threw out that word Facebook. And immediately her face just scrunched up like, we don't use Facebook. And that's just my ignorance. You've got somebody who's not their generation thinking that we know how to communicate, but we don't. We need to have the generation after us and even the generation after that tell us how to communicate. I also have a very selfish interest in the establishment of the associate board, and that is that one of my roles with LifeAct also is to bring on new board members and to cultivate a diverse board that can add a lot of value in a lot of different ways. And it's difficult to find trained board members. You can find passionate people, but trained board members is more difficult. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin to train younger people in the process of running a board. I think that philanthropy is a learned skill, yes. And I'm not sure that my generation, or maybe the generation after mine, has done a really good job of training the next generation for how to participate in philanthropy. And we need to do that. We need to get strong leaders in there, and they're not just going to pop up overnight. They need to be cultivated. And I think I would love to see every member of our associate board go on to be a board member of our organization. but at least I'd like to see them join some boards that they're very interested in and hit the ground running, but really be an impact player from the start.
It's really what leadership should be, is always cultivating the next round coming forward. So I think it's absolutely marvelous what you've created. But you said something earlier, Jack, and I so agree with this. There is nothing G-rated anymore. We can protect our kids as much as possible, but there's always going to be some friend in the group that doesn't have the controls or this or that. And there's just so much digital and media out there and virtual connection, communication. A lot of it is very good, but a lot of it can really impact both our brains physiologically, but also our emotional well-being. And so it sounds like you've entered into, by addressing this in middle school, do you see a lot of that impact? Does it come up in the trainings or the programs in terms of how kids view social media or what they have access to?
I had one young woman on our youth advisory board, and our youth advisory board is different from our associate board. Our youth advisory board is actually high schoolers, and we're looking for messaging from them too. And I had one young woman on our youth advisory board a couple of years ago. We were talking about social media, and she said, Mr. Binder, you need to understand that if I get a text message that says something like, or an Instagram post that says, I can't believe she wore these clothes to school today, or her hair looked like this, or she's fat, or she's this, or she's that. She said, there might only be 50 people seeing it, but I feel like there's 50 million. So the gravity of that is just unbelievable when you're talking about doing that to an impressionable, you can be talking about 11, a 12, or 13-year-old. They might not feel comfortable going to their parents or going to anyone else. They've got to bear the full brunt of that. So no, these kids are absolutely dialed into it. When we introduced our middle school program, we focus grouped with a lot of middle school teachers. And we said, this is how we think we want to steer the content. And we're going to go a little bit light on the S word, the suicide word, and more on stress and depression. And across the board, every teacher said, don't dodge the word. They said, these sixth graders know the word, and they talk about the word, so don't pretend it doesn't exist. And that was really a wake-up call for our organization that, as soon as we introduced our middle school program, we were being asked by primary grades, what do you have for us?
But I love that you didn't shy away from that and you really took their feedback, because I think we as adults sometimes think we're protecting our children by not mentioning it, and we're doing just the opposite, because then it becomes taboo and we can't talk about it, and then they don't talk about it. Brilliant. Keep going. Yeah. So
I run into some parents, we talk about social media, and they say, well, we limit our kids' social media. And I just kind of nod my head and I'm like, you sure think you do. All they need to do is walk up to the parking lot in our office and see a dozen kids huddled around one person's iPad or cell phone at 2:30 after school. You think you're limiting it, you think you're doing your best, but the easier thing to say is, let's assume they're exposed to everything and let's deal with it instead of pretending it doesn't exist.
Do you find that schools welcome your program in and want you to come in, and tell me how that works?
So I would say in general, they really welcome our program. And one of the main reasons is it's a very difficult topic. And there are not that many people who are trained in delivering it. And even if they are, they're not comfortable with what happens if a student comes forward. They're not comfortable with how to respond to that. So the opportunity to bring in a professional who does this day in and day out and understands the way to respond to these questions, they're very anxious to have that. We've got a very high rate of recurrence in schools coming in year after year after year. Again, we've grown from 8, 10, 12 schools to about 200 schools now. Our limiting factor right now is really the number of instructors in geography, but the schools are very receptive to it. We require that the classroom teachers stay in the classroom for the program because they represent continuity after we leave. We also feel, and we've asked several students this question, because I was wondering, not having a background in this, is being a stranger in the classroom a strength or a weakness? Basically, every student has told us we're much more comfortable with an outsider. This is somebody who we don't have to see every day, possibly for the next 4 years. It's not my homeroom teacher. It's not my coach. They feel that they can open up a little bit. And I've experienced that in some of the classes where 5 or 10 minutes in, we will have one of our instructors say something like a very open-ended question. Who here knows somebody who's been struggling, emotionally? We won't call it depression yet, but they've just had emotional problems. And you'll see almost every hand in the classroom go up. And at the end of the classroom teacher will come up and say, I never would have guessed that. If I would have asked that question, none of those hands would have gone up, or maybe one. But they respond to their classroom teacher differently than they respond to ours.
You know, it's interesting because it doesn't sound like they mind that their classroom teacher stays in the classroom because they're in the back and they sort of forget maybe. But I would imagine students feel that if a classroom teacher or coach or someone they see every day raises this as an issue, that they will be, as a student, looked at differently.
No, I think that's absolutely the case.
So one thing I've noticed, Jack, that I want to say as a leader, and I want to give you a huge compliment, is I noticed that in every sort of scenario that you paint, you ask questions because you don't need to have the answers. You're seeking the best route in. And I just want to, I want to comment on that because it isn't always that I see that as a consultant in the world of nonprofit.
I take that as a huge compliment because I think I've made a career out of surrounding myself with really high caliber people. And I don't want to surround myself with people who I tell what to do. I need them to tell me what to do. I need them to know more than I know.
Is there a national platform for your program? Can you get it out virtually? And then I'll talk about COVID and what you've done. Is there a way to grow this? Because I don't know other programs that have the same approach that you have.
I think most people who I work with and who work around me know that I'm kind of a silver linings guy. And there are a ton of silver linings to COVID. One of them has been it's accelerated our progress on creating new modules for education and new ways to reach students in a distance learning model without losing the in-person touch.
Good.
So that's what we've been working on. We've invested in that heavily. Our funders have been very supportive to put that together, but we are reaching a point where the platform we've developed is robust and it is scalable and it can be moved out with professional development really anywhere we want it to be. We're probably less than a year away from having that capability. What we don't want to lose is the personal touch. We don't want to just become a webinar. You know, there's some value to some of those. It's not our thing. And it's not what our founder wanted it to be. Our founder wanted that personal connection. Just backing up a little bit, the gentleman who founded our organization, when he lost his son, he partnered with AFSP, which is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And they're a great organization. They do a lot of research, a lot of valuable long-term studies and research. But I think what he wanted out of this, he wanted an immediate return. He wanted impact today. He wanted to see the faces of the kids who he was helping in his lifetime. And we've kind of stayed with that mission. And that's where putting our people, our trained professionals into the classrooms, it gets immediate results. And we're uncovering the students hopefully early, hopefully several years before it's a crisis stage. And that's kind of the secret sauce that we have, if you will. And I think that this type of platform now has reached the point where it can be rolled out on a much larger scale. I was sitting in on a talk by a gentleman from Nationwide Children's Hospital, a psychologist. He said, at what point in time did we start discussing suicide as an option? And I thought that was very insightful, that young people will say, well, you know, if your life is really bad, there's all these options. And one of these options is suicide. And he's thinking, when did suicide become an option?
That's a great question.
And it's just a very different way of thinking, but I think it is being thought that way. And it's almost, you know, when something like 13 Reasons comes out on Netflix, and it really kind of glamorizes the whole situation. Back to your point about the fact that our program can be nimble and we can adjust. When that program came out, we deliver our program in several all-girls schools. And it was a very hot topic in these schools. That's all they wanted to talk about. So our instructors said, guess what? We have to pivot. We need to address the current day need. And we need them to understand that, you know, in 13 Reasons, they never really addressed it as an illness. They addressed the failure of every professional to help them instead of the opportunity for professionals to help them. They really painted the adults in a very poor light, that it's almost fruitless to go to a trusted adult because they really won't help you. So it did a lot of damage, and we needed to address those things immediately. The concept of contagion is tremendous, and I think what school districts in particularly need to focus on is that contagion isn't a function of what you tell them, it's a function of what they know.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we had a school where we lost a young girl, and for a lot of different reasons, the messaging to the students was that she lost her life after a prolonged illness. In this case, there was an eating disorder, but it ended in a very bad way. And I got a call from a youth advisory board member who actually attends that school, and she was in tears. And she was saying, why won't they tell us the truth? Because the students knew, before the school knew, what the cause of death was and how this happened. So pretending it didn't happen that way doesn't address contagion.
Yeah, what a great point. You know, our young folks are savvy in a lot of ways. And yet, if we don't provide the accurate information, they'll seek information elsewhere that may not be as accurate. So really perfectly said.
I think it's hard too because suicide is still a topic that adults don't want to talk about. We're doing something that's unheard of. You know, we're talking to kids about it. And one of the root causes of why kids are struggling so much and they don't understand it is because adults don't want to talk about it either. So I think, you know, even for me, like when I told some people, adults didn't get it, you know, they'd be like, okay, so like you're sad a few days, like sucks, you know, feel better. A lot of people just truly don't get it, even as adults. So I think part of the thing that I love about, you know, teaching in the schools is like the teacher does stay there and the teacher's learning with the students. I think teaching them is just as important as teaching students because they need to know the signs. They need to feel like people can come to them, whether or not they do or not. It's just an important thing to still teach everyone, as many people as we can, and try to open the discussion.
There's this generational issue, and we face that continuously, and we face situations where parents are in denial that it couldn't be their kid. And hopefully it couldn't be your kid, but that's a little bit naive. So we can actually reframe it with the parents, and we say, of course it couldn't be your kid, but your kid could help someone else, and then your kid could be the hero. And they say, oh, my kid can be the hero? Then it's great. Then we'll certainly educate them about it.
I love these angles in. They're so important. And what I wanted to respond to Lizzie's comment is it may be hard, it may be scary to talk about, but it's life-threatening not to talk about it. I really appreciate that. And I love what Jack said is sort of another way in. So it gives me another question is when you provide a middle school program, is there an option for parents not to sit in on their own kids, but to be educated for themselves in terms of not only what you teach, because you want parents to be able to have those conversations knowing that kids at school have had a similar conversation.
Laura, I'm probably letting out a few too many trade secrets here, but I'm really bad at keeping secrets. A couple of the tactics we use, for instance, when we're in front of students, we might present some information that it's presented in such a way as it's geared more toward adults. And we tell the students, this is geared toward adults, but we're going to let you in on it. And you can hear a pin drop. Now, the exact same psychology works with parents.
It's perfect.
When you say, we normally wouldn't be telling you this because this is just for kids, their ears perk up and they want to listen. So that's how we kind of put it to the parents is that we're going to let you in on this little secret of how we address these topics with your teens. And then they'll listen as long as it doesn't implicate them. And I can't think of a better way to say that. You know, the parents are judgmental of each other. And when you hold an evening at a school to talk about behavioral health and mental illness, the parents, when we say, why would you not attend that? They say, well, because if we go there, the other parents are looking at us saying, I didn't realize your son or daughter had a problem. Mm-hmm. They all feel like they're being judged. So we need to come up with creative ways that allows us to have discussions with them in a non-judgmental and manner without the stigma.
It's so much about judgment, and I think that stems from the stigma, but I think it stems from feeling judged about parenting in general, because there are classes, but there are no required courses on how to be a good parent. You know, we assume it's automatic. And so we think if what we're doing, if it's judged by somebody else in a negative way, then we have to return that, right? It's just it's a non-village mentality, but we're all in a collective, right?
And I think there's been a lot of, previous thought that if a kid is sick, it's because their parents parented them in the wrong way. They did something wrong. They were neglectful. Like all of these things could just be landed on the parents. And so I think that's another reason that they're so afraid to talk about it and they're so afraid to explain that their child might be struggling is because people are going to judge them and say, well, you did a bad job as a parent. So I think also educating parents that this is a brain disorder. Like, they did not cause this. There are many factors. It's better to get help than it is to be afraid to get help because you're putting the blame on yourself.
And it's not an illness. The flu is an illness. This is a disease. This is a disease of a bodily organ, no different than lung disease, kidney disease, something like that. And it needs to be treated in a professional manner. You need to seek professional help, and there shouldn't be this stigma behind it. It's not that you're a defective person. Right. You just have a disease of an organ that needs to be addressed professionally.
I love that because it's often that silent disease. It's there are other diseases that can be, there's certain learning disabilities that fall into a category where if you don't see it, there's something wrong with the individual versus they have an illness that needs to be treated. So the frame is so important, and we need so much more education in that arena. Share with me COVID-19. School's out. You're unable to get in front of kids. What have you done? How have you managed during this time?
Necessity being the mother of invention, we've launched several variations of our program. We've got a virtual, which we're not really fond of because it takes away a large part of that person-to-person contact. We have a hybrid model where frequently an instructor will be delivering the program personally, but it will not be in the same room as the students. So they'll be in the same building, but not in the same room. And then thankfully, a lot of schools that we are in have been back in session. And they want our teachers in there. They want us in the classroom. I think that this week, we're in person in 6 or 7 schools. It's been a real challenge, and it's difficult for our instructors, believe it or not, because they thrive on the building of trust. And that's so hard to do virtually. And then there is the other issue of responsibility. If you can't be there for them, should you even be opening that door? If you can't be available for them. And so that's why ensuring that there is a trusted adult in their virtual classroom is so important to us, and that they have the proper marching orders. If a student comes forward, this is how to handle it. This is the triage process. These are the resources available. But again, it's given us an opportunity to do more outreach to parents. We are now introducing programming calling QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, which is really designed to teach a lot of the same skills to adults that we teach to students. So we're really just broadening the net within which we can catch these students when they're struggling. So there's a lot of good that came out of it. We've had enough good now. We can go back to normal. We've also introduced a self-care program. We do not deliver our standard program to students who are not in a classroom setting because we can't be certain that they have a trusted adult there with them. So we have a self-care program, which is really more positive focused, and it's designed to help and to also convey some resources, but without the triggering mechanisms that could exist in a classroom setting. So I think that self-care program is really going to go a long way too. And that will stay with us after COVID, just as QPR will. So we've grown quite a bit.
So as you both may know, toward the end of the interview, I always ask quick and gutsy questions. So if you all are ready, I'd love to ask you my round of quick and gutsy questions.
Okay.
What is at the top of your wish list for LifeAct, but the answer cannot be money or funding?
If I could have an unlimited supply of passionate instructors.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
They're the tip of the spear. I mean, they're the ones who get it done. Myself and most of the staff here at the office, we strictly facilitate what they do. They're our magic. I would just like to have more instructors.
What a great answer. That's great. Lizzie, what about you? What's your wish?
I think just being able to reach more students, but again, keeping that meaningful connection. I don't think the answer is to go virtual all across the country. I think there's too many, again, webinars where everyone just checks the box, like, yes, they taught this program and it's done. Like Jack said, LifeAct is very different, and having the personal communication with an instructor is important. So I think, like Jack said, needing more instructors, and then my wish would just be able to reach more people outside of Northeast Ohio.
It occurred to me, I used to years and years ago work for an employee assistance program, and we had a hub in Massachusetts where I lived, but we had affiliates all across the country delivering our program because there were, host corporations in one spot, but they had satellite offices. So I'm wondering for you all, even though I do think a virtual platform is great, if you were the hub, but then we're able to train facilitators to go into classrooms across the country. Just a thought. I had my consulting hat
It
on.
absolutely is the idea that I'm talking about. I probably misspoke. When I talk about the virtual curriculum, it wouldn't be that a student or an educator could just log on to a website and deliver it. It would be for the use of our instructors and for the professional development. So if we had an instructor in San Diego or Phoenix or Melbourne, Florida, we can do the professional development remotely. So we wouldn't have to bring everybody back into Cleveland. And we can also update it. Again, when topics come up, vaping, when hot topics come up, we can integrate them across the platform so everybody can be upgraded to the most current information. But we would never want to lose the personal contact. It would just make training local instructors much easier.
I actually love that idea. And I love that idea because you'd have a resource base. So yeah, that's my wish for you, to grow that exponentially with on the ground facilitators. Just terrific.
I hope your wishes come true.
I do too. Well, I hope both of yours do as well. You need all those instructors, right? And you need the personal connection, which I hear loud and clear. If you were to think of a song that describes LifeAct, what would it be?
So I have kind of a freaky experience that has happened to me. Before I was even associated with the organization, I was driving to a meeting that they invited me to join. I got in my car, and a song came on that was about Short Life by the band Perry. And that came on, and it was on a station that I never listened to. When I left the meeting that night, I pulled out of a parking garage in downtown Cleveland, and that song was on. But that's not the song that I would say would be Hang On by REM.
Lizzie, what about you?
So I think there are a lot of songs that actually talk about mental health, but I think a lot of them can be pretty sad and dark. But one that has always been really empowering for me was Fight Song by Rachel Platten. It's just very empowering. It is powerful. It's just saying, get through it. You know, everything will be okay in the end, which I think is one of the messages that I hope we can spread to the youth.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great choice. And it's not without the struggle, but you're getting help to manage the struggle. That's what's so beautiful. You're not ignoring it. And I know you've shared a lot about this, but if there's anything additionally that you'd like to say that makes your organization gutsy, because it is gutsy, what do you think makes it gutsy?
I like to tell our board and our funders and anyone who will listen that we punch well above our weight class. We are a small organization that's doing huge things. And when you think about an organization our size generating 3,200 referrals from students in one school year, the impact of that is just awesome. And when you frame that to a funder and they realize that they're making a contribution of X amount, that you say to them, well, they might say to us, okay, 3,200 referrals. Are you telling us that 3,200 students were prepared to take their lives? And we'll say, absolutely not. These are just 3,200 students who said there's something wrong and we're on a bad course and we need to fix it. But I'll turn the tables on them and I'll say, what if it's only 10% of them? 320. What if it's only 1%? 32. What if it's only one kid? And what if it's your kid? What's that worth?
Right.
And it's
so true.
It's kind of end of discussion after that.
You have such a great frame or reframe for those kinds of discussions. And I think that if there's 3,200 kids and they're coming forward with something, you got to address the something so it doesn't lead to something else, which is exactly your point. I love it. Lizzie, what do you think makes LifeAct gutsy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it before, but I think talking about something that people don't want to talk about. Really, no one wants to talk about suicide. I don't know one person who, if I were to ask them or have a conversation, that they would joyfully engage and be excited to talk about how important this is and how much they want to make a difference in kids' lives. I think I've hopefully reached people in my story, but again, it's something that people they don't want to engage in the conversation if they don't have to. So I think really trying to change that dialogue, trying to address it with adults, with kids, like saying it happens, it's okay if you're feeling this way, and to get help. I think that makes LifeAct very gutsy.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it makes it bold and courageous too, because you're taking on something that most people would rather shy away or not know about. So I couldn't agree with you more. Is there something that outsiders or maybe even insiders don't know about LifeAct?
Most people who know our organization, and this is probably my fault for poor branding, we have people who will say, oh, you're with LifeAct, you're that suicide place. And we're like, well, no, we're a lot more than that. We're about mental health, and we're about wellness, and we're about avoiding the S word. And if the ultimate success in our organization is if the word suicide never needs to be mentioned, that means we really did our job well. We did education, early identification, and we got the referrals where they needed to be. And then suicide, the discussion goes away. We're not at that point, but I'd like to reframe that. And I would even say that some of our board still are hung up on that word. Many of our donors are, and it's an ongoing rebranding issue for us.
Well, it's the idea of being proactive and looking at it as a positive, supporting life. Lizzie, anything that you can think of?
I think, again, we spoke about this earlier, but the culture of LifeAct, the staff is small, but the reach is unbelievable. And I've honestly never been a part of an organization that was so devoted to helping not only others, but to helping the people within the organization. So it's so much more than reaching the students, but it's reaching the youth advisory board, it's reaching the associate board, it's helping the board of directors. Like, everyone is being helped by this organization. And I think that is very rare to find.
I agree. And it speaks to what outsiders don't know, and only maybe insiders do know, is really the culture of, if you want to volunteer or if you want to get involved, please think about LifeAct, because it really is an opportunity both to give but to receive. That's what it sounds like to me. And my last quick and gutsy question is, if you could get one celebrity or influencer to endorse or talk about LifeAct, who would it be?
I think I would love to have Michael Phelps. He's been so outspoken. He's been a public face for it. Locally, there's a basketball player by the name of Kevin Love who's been quite outspoken about it. I'm sorry, Lizzie, did I just...
You stole my two. Oh my goodness, Jack. Literally, I have on my paper Kevin Love and Michael Phelps. Come on.
Those are two. We're going to hashtag them both, try to get them on, to respond on Instagram, to, any others. I'll give you a chance, Liz, even though those were your two. Any additional?
I was going to say, well, my reasoning is because I think a lot of women have come forward and spoken about their recovery and the importance. And I think we're still really missing the male component of all these people who are struggling. Athletes are very susceptible, and I think people really don't understand that or recognize it. So I think Kevin Love, Michael Phelps have done an amazing job of really speaking out about their recovery and what they've been through. So I think, again, men, I think they need to come to the table more, and we need more men to be open about it and talk about it.
Yeah, well said. Really well said. So how do folks reach you?
So our website is www.lifeact.org. That's LIFEACT.org, and or info@lifeact.org. And if you'd like to see our program in your school, if you'd like to find out what services we can deliver to your community, please reach out to us. The demand is very great for our services right now, and I feel that it's going to be far worse in the near future. I know that Dr. John Hertzer, who's the president of our organization, he told us that behavioral health ER visits are up 38% so far this year over last year. It's a big concern. But we welcome anybody who wants to get involved, who would like to learn more. And my email is execdir, short for executive director, @lifeact.org. Reach out to me directly.
Well, I just have to tell you how much of a pleasure this was, and a great reframe for myself and my own education around the discussion of suicide, but really prolonging life and really getting the help one needs. So I just want to thank Jack, you and Lizzie for contributing your time with me today, your effort, your stories, your experience, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Lizzie, for joining us.
Thank you.
Our blog of these small and gutsy nonprofits and small social impact organizations can be found in the organizational story section of the Intrinsic Group website, so that we can continue to link clients, volunteers, future employees, and donors to this small but mighty network. Of course, we can't take responsibility outside of our own vetting of the organizations we interview. So before you sign on to support or work for them, we encourage you to do your own due diligence and research them as well. We just want you to learn about the small and gutsy nonprofit and social impact organizational sector so they can spread their story and their impactful work. I want to thank my partners in this endeavor, the Intrinsic Group, a management consulting firm specializing in guiding organizations to leverage talent, optimize processes, and to ensure the organization's narrative is aligned with their culture. The volunteers, my co-producer, sound engineer, and composer, Pavel Franson, and my graphic designer, Nate Addy, my social work intern extraordinaire, Stephanie Tran. Please check out their bios on the Intrinsic website, and all the folks, friends, and family who have guided and inspired me. And thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, give us some stars, and write a review on wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're interested in sponsoring Small and Gutsy to keep it going, please reach out to me at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com or buy us a coffee at www.buymeacoffee.com/small and gutsy. So as you all know, we've started since our 10th episode to give shout outs to all of you who are giving a shout out to us. So here we go. Margaret Lichter. Love these. It's exciting to hear the stories and missions of these smaller nonprofits. Laura does a terrific job interviewing, and you'll come away with each podcast energized and inspired. Thanks, Margaret Lichter. Really appreciate that comment. From small and gutsy to big with impact, I'm Laura Witkoff, and thanks for listening.